Hi all, I have a fantastic game to show you today for our notable games. This was Magnus Carlsen, our current world chess champion, against Chao, played in Qatar Masters round 5. An absolutely thrilling game. Chao is a 26-year-old Chinese grandmaster, the number 2 Chinese grandmaster in the world to Ding Liren currently on the FIDE rating list. Asian champion in 2013, FIDE rating 2750. So not a bad opponent for Magnus, who's 2834 at the moment. Magnus kicks off with d4, and we see knight f6, c4, g6, and Magnus chooses an anti-Grünfeld system, which has become quite popular in recent years, f3. So it makes it very different from normal Grünfeld defense lines. Black often plays d5 anyway here. C takes, knight takes, so we have e4. So white has constructed an interesting center here. Without the knight being on c3, black can't chop that knight and fracture the structure on the queen side. Knight b6, we see a very, very exciting game setting already, really. It looks as though white is going to play like this, as though he's playing against a Sicilian dragon. Knight c3, bishop g7, this is the most common sequence. Castles, queen d2, so we have this standard battery to try and exchange off the bishop here and weaken the squares. And quite often, like playing against the Sicilian dragon, the h-pawn is quite useful to try and blast open the king. We see knight c6, black has central pressure, white castles queenside. And the most common move here is actually f5, that's played, trying to get a grip on white's light squares in the position here. White does play e5, and we see knight b4. This is all pretty standard stuff, seen before quite frequently. Now here, black is securing potentially a nice outpost on d5, as well as often playing bishop e6, and white's usual move in this position is to play knight h3. It looks a little bit quirky, but that is actually the most common move. The knight's heading for f4 to try and contest these two squares. It can't actually go via e2, I believe, because of knight c4. That would be blocking in the bishop. So this is the quirky but the correct way to get to control and influence these two key squares here. Now usually in Livebook the most common move here is to follow up with bishop e6. 44 games at least, hitting a2, and it looks extremely logical for black to do this, and games might continue like this. And here white can play h4, and it's been seen before quite a bit. White's thought to be a little bit better. So there's a big fight both in the centre, and white's threatening the h file as well. So a very, very interesting game position that would be. But here we see an innovation move from a Livebook perspective. Also seen before quite a bit is, well, 6 games, not quite a bit. Knight 4 to d5. a5 there's been 3 games, c6 3 games, but this is special, queen e8. Very, very interesting. Magnus here takes time to move his king towards the corner. He actually plays king b1 in this position, so delaying knight f4, seeing what black's actually doing. And black plays a5. So this could be useful for a battering ram pawn, and it's also securing the knight at the moment. Bishop e2 now is played. With these knights covering these squares, yeah, the bishop's a little bit shy at the moment. So it goes to e2. We see c6, securing the d5 square a bit more. It is a bit loosening potentially to the knight on b6 though. If ever there's a d5, you'll note this bishop will be on the b6 knight, so a potential loose piece issue tactically. We see rook c1. So white seems to have a good position here generally, and he's delaying any kingside intentions, not showing his hand on the kingside just yet. And black actually takes time to move his king into the corner. So it seems a rather strange scenario, because you would have thought these default rooks just sitting here against the kings would be a little bit of a concern for the kings shuffling to the corners. And in fact, Magnus mirrors this king h8 now with king a1. What on earth is going on, you might think? Why are the kings going where the rooks are? Well, the files need to be opened though. It's no small matter to open the rook files to the kings here. We see bishop e6. And now that prompts here knight f4 with tempo. Now that there's a target, a concrete target, the knight commits to the f4 square. And the point of queen e8 is shown, and queen f7 just to support the bishop here, and treble the pressure on a2. So, is this a great innovation? It looks pretty dangerous, and if white takes off that bishop, you know, maybe the knights are going to be beautiful blockaders, for example, of the d5 square. Magnus didn't play this, but it would seem black has good blockade potential here, especially on d5, and good prospects. And also lurking here, of course, are things like knight a4, rather crude, but putting pressure on a2. a2 is an issue here, potentially. So that move wasn't chosen to snap off the bishop. Instead, the classic h-file opening procedure, h4. And it represents a positional pawn sack, of course. It's to speed up the h-file opening against the king on h8. Yes, the a2 pawn is given up here. Now, if black doesn't take on a2, for example, let's say black wants to clamp down on h5 and plays the move h5. He didn't play this, he actually took on a2 with his bishop. But say black does play h5, it seems white can rip things open with g4 anyway. We've seen Bobby Fischer playing positions like this, where he's just ripping open lines very energetically with moves like g4 if needed, especially against Sicilian dragons. This kind of position represents a disaster scenario for black. Absolute disaster scenario. So, complete disaster. Yeah, it's difficult to clamp down on white's kingside attack here with a move like h5. So the pawn is taken here, and in taking the pawn, of course, yeah, there is a slight weakening of white's king a little bit. But h5, white is going for black's king. Yeah, these rooks have a lust for the opponent's king here. The king steps a little bit out of the way. It's a really dangerous, critical position. What else can black do in this position? You might think g5. Let's just check this. g5. Is that a crazy idea? It runs into knight g6. Yeah, because then we're just winning the queen there, with black having little compensation. This is a good position for white. Yes. So yeah, knight g6 is pretty good there. And g takes h5 just looks absolutely terrible. White's just going to double. So yeah, black just he took, sorry, after taking on a2, now he just sidesteps with the king to avoid imminent disaster. So we have h takes g6, h takes g6. So we have the rook eyeing now, especially the sensitive h7 square. And if only the queen could be here with a battery on h7. That's the dream for the queen, to get to h7. How can the dream be realized here? There's so many things in the way. How can the queen quickly get to h2? Well, this next move clears the path to get to h2, g4, and it also usefully as well threatens to rip open to shreds the g file if black's not careful. Black plays now bishop b3, which implies actually not just control of c2 could be useful, but also this pawn that is coming down, and the exit squares have definitely been locked down for white's king. But now, contesting even the c2 square, and also defensive and attacking, guess what white plays? It's a move which apparently Chao might have overlooked a little bit. White's play here a quite little defensive attacking move. What would you play here if I give you 5 seconds starting from now? Bishop d1, yes, to fulfill the dream of the queen on a battery to h7. Queen might be coming to h2 next as well as contesting c2 and hitting the bishop. And of course this is a nuisance move in other respects as well, because the bishop needs to be protected now in some variations. You know, for example, if here, then we can just snap this bishop off. Black carries on trying to get to the white king. a4, it seems only two moves away, and then it will be a total disaster for white. But queen h2 threatens a mating one. It's pretty energetic and quick. Black has to do something, provides an exit square for his king, the f8 square. We have check, king f8. But now a really, really powerful move is played in this position. One of the most powerful moves available to white. Can you guess what white plays in this position if I give you 5 seconds? Let's pause the video now. Okay, d5. Now you'll note here that a3's been held up. I mean, if we try various things here like a3, we can actually just snap off the bishop. The bishop's not protected by anything because d5 has dislocated black's pieces. So bishop takes b3 and there's nothing for black here. So that fails. Bishop takes d5, we can take on b6, that fails. Everything starts to fail. Knight 6 on 6 to d5, e6. This position is really dangerous. You'll note that black has interrupted his protection of b3. So any a3 here, trying to even set the queen, is not going to work. Anyway, we can just take the queen. In any case, there's no attack there. But here on e6, queen f6, we can take here, queen g8 check, and rook h8, and we're actually mating the black king. This pawn is providing a mating net. It's stopping the exit of the black king here. So black never gets a chance really to do anything in this position. He just gets mated like this with that pawn on e6. Yeah, d5 is such a crushing move. It seems there's no easy answer to d5. Knight 4 takes d5, again e6, and the same sort of thing. This variation with the rook and queen crash down on the f8 bishop. So yeah, d5, incredibly powerful move. Knight c4 is played, which has a beautiful conception behind it, which we're about to see. Knight takes g6 is played. If here it's tempting to play e6, and this doesn't play e6, and there's a beautiful conception, really beautiful, from Chao, to his great resourceful credit. What a resourceful idea! If Magnus had just played e6. Black, can you see what black can play in this position? If I give you 5 seconds starting from now. Black can just sack the queen, a3. And it doesn't. White's helpless in this position because knight takes g6 here. We have queen takes g6, and white is pretty helpless here. You know, if he plays this, then he gets mated in 2. and you know there's nothing really. So yeah, it's just helpless, this position for white. If he tries this, rook takes a3, and then bishop takes d1 is mating white because of rook b3. So again, if we take the queen here, we have rook b3 check now. Look at these knights controlling all the exit squares, and then the other rook comes in to do the job, the execution job. There's only one move, checkmate. So beautiful conception if only e6 was played, but e6 wasn't played here. e6 is winning, it seems, for black in all variations after a3. This queen sack, just for those interested, queen g8 here. It's not going anywhere for white. White's facing doom now, imminent doom now. Look at how many pieces around white's king. This is just brilliant for black. Even if it's not totally mating outright, it's going to be winning tons of material. So yeah, Magnus wisely, very wisely, does not play e6. Whatever you do in this position, yeah, don't play e6. He played actually knight takes g6 check, and this looks to be like one of the absolute best moves in the position. Another move actually mentioned by engines apparently with advantage to white is bishop e2. But yeah, this seems to be the strongest move, so let's go with it. What is it doing against black's a3? Well, first of all, let's examine queen takes g6 here, queen takes, and a3 in this position. Isn't this dangerous? No. In this position, white has a fantastic resource. Can you see? If I give you 5 seconds, starting from now. White has rook h8 check. Yeah, white can get to checkmate first. Bishop takes g7, not queen takes g7. Well, it's better than queen takes g7. This is just mating. It's standard mating combination. So yeah, black cannot sack the queen. That's the first point here. So knight takes g6. The queen takes g6 is not working. So king e8. And it's here with the knight on g6. Yes, take each position on its own merit. It's here in this exact position that e6 works a lot better now against a3. What else apart from a3 is black going to do in this position? If he plays queen f6, queen g8 check, and then we get this rook h8, and this pawn is helping cover the exit squares, so black has no chance really to do anything. He's going to get mated. So we have the move a3 finally being played. We're reaching a massive climax of the game. Black is sacrificing his queen here. But isn't white facing doom? There's 3, 4, 5 things ready to help mate the white king here. E takes f7, taking off the opponent's queen. And we see king d7. And we take this point to pause here. What is helping A takes B be so effective here for mating the king? What would change the picture of A takes B being that effective? I think it helps to sometimes work backwards from what you need to how you get there to achieve what you need. What is helping A takes B being so effective? It's this knight on c4. And if you think the knight on c4, is there any way of bribing that knight to go away somehow? Because also, you know, this bishop's actually a loose piece in this position. It's not protected by anything, nor is this knight here, in fact. But we've got a bishop eyeing b3 as well. If only that knight on c4 was not there. If only. It's another dream. Can we see that dream happen in reality here? Magnus plays a super duper move, which basically does challenge that knight directly. It forks the knight with the king. Knight e5 check. We're forking the king and the knight. And you might think, hang on, there's a slight snag here. You might think, well, okay, I can play this. And then that's a disaster because we take out that piece. And A takes B is not effectual. You know, we can take with the king here. There's nothing for black there. But isn't there a snag of this fork? Black can just play bishop takes e5, surely. This is the game continuation. Now, before we check that, yeah, anything else is a clear disaster apart from bishop takes e5. You know, if king c7, we can just take on c4. We've taken out that knight, job done. So this is harmless, relatively harmless, this position. White's just clearly winning. So he's forking that key knight, key attacking knight. So black's virtually compelled to take bishop takes e5. I hope you'll agree. So how to get this knight away from b2? The dream is still there. Is there still any hope left for white? Queen takes f5. As Fischer says, Patzer sees a check, Patzer plays a check. But Magnus is no Patzer. He's definitely worked out that this check is useful for the dream. To get this knight away from b2. That's the dream here. Now what does black do? The king's cut off from the pawn. Can't go on c8. Unfortunately, the king has to go, it seems, on the dark square. Or e6 just temporarily delays going onto a dark square. The king goes onto a dark square here. King c7. And king d6, I mean, there's other things as well here. This is leading to similar ideas than the game. So I'll just show you the game idea. Remember the dream? We don't want this knight on c4. So king c7, guess what white plays in this position? So bear in mind the dream. If I give you 5 seconds here, what would you play with white in this position? Yep, queen takes e5, trying to drag this knight away so we can just take this guy and not have 8 takes b execute our king. Now what if black refuses and tries to leave his knight there on c4? If black plays king c8, then the black king, unfortunately, is getting it off the check. What does black do here? If he puts the rook in a way, this pawn is queening. Or just rook h8 check, we don't even need to queen. Knight b5 check here is a mate in 2, unfortunately for black. Because black's king's exits have all been shut down here. Checkmate. So, yeah. So king c8 check is pretty terminal. King b8 here, check. This position is blocking the rook. Now even in this position, okay, we haven't achieved the dream, to be fair, but we've blocked the rook here, and it turns out here b takes a3 is safe now to play b takes a3 without getting mated. This position is winning for white, so black's got a load of hanging pieces in this position, like the bishop on b3. If he takes here, there's nothing for black here. Black hasn't got time for this sort of thing. Check, check. White's going to be defending, or not too bothered now. Can even take on e7. Not too bothered about this. This isn't harmful. Black's busted. So yeah. So in this line, queen takes e5 check. It seems black hasn't got too many great choices here. If he plays, so king d7 or king c8, yeah, they're not too hot. Let's go with king c8 again, just to review that check. it's hopeless here. We've seen that it's pretty hopeless. Yeah, blocking the rook. So we'll go back. So the knight takes. We've distracted that knight. We've achieved the dream there. And now there's a loose piece to pick off. Bishop takes b3. And where is a takes b2 now in all this? It's not as effective. And the knight can't even return back. c4 is controlled. So a takes b2. Not as effective as black had hoped for. Knight bd3 check. Here, white is material up. And he's got this dangerous passed pawn on f7. The smoke has cleared. Knight takes c1. Rook takes c1. The sun is out for white now. The dark clouds around white's king have all disappeared, leaving black actually in a terrible position. Bishop f4 is threatened here, pinning that knight on e5. Terrible position. If knight takes pawn, this wasn't played, then d takes. Absolutely terrible. Where's the knight go? If it goes here, it's just awful. This is actually a mate in 5. Check. Check. The black king is actually getting mated here by force. How cruel. Black's fate. Checkmate. In some of these variations. Yeah, this is an incredibly precarious position for black. On knight takes f7. Yeah, black's king is getting torn to shreds here. So we see king c8. D takes c6. Again, black's king is getting torn to shreds. There's ideas like bishop e6 check now. And if, c7 check. So black takes on c6 to get rid of that dangerous pawn. But now f4. These major passed pawns. Black on move 36 here, resigned. If he takes here, then we got this nasty check, just picking up the knight. White's overwhelmingly material up. No black attack at all. Huge passed pawn on f7. Yeah, so f4. Black resigns. If knight g6, just f5. We've got 3 connected passed pawns basically over here. So the sun is definitely out for white here in this position. Now preparing things like this. It's over. We've got 3 connected passed pawns as well. As well as a raging attack on black's king. This is actually a forced mate as well, this position. Pretty soon. So yeah. Wow, what a complex game. What can we get from this game? I'm forced to be reminded of a recent blitz game I had. I thought I was nearly mating my opponent. I had all my pieces for a mating net formed, but unless there was this one forcing move which changed the picture, it took away my attacking resources, and I thought it was a bit analogous to this. Black's beautiful construction, especially in the e6 lines, having a queen sacrifice, rely on the knight, especially holding for a takes b2 to open up the rook for rook a1 mate. And within that, there's potentially a loose piece on b3. So one of the important things driving that is the knight on c4. It seems Magnus got a position where he was able to inflict terrible forcing moves after winning the queen to actually alter that knight on c4, to influence it, to fork the king and the knight, the attacking knight, and then queen sack. So finally getting that knight away and then taking on b3, and it was all over. It's horrendously all over in a terrible way for black after the smoke cleared. Before that, if we rewind further though, black's main novelty move, queen e8, was very, very interesting, but Magnus was never tempted, it seems, to take on e6. He turned the whole thing, black's innovation, into a positional pawn sacrifice. He didn't mind the treble pressure on a2. He wanted to accelerate his own attack. So just let black take the a2 pawn. So he put his own king safety seemingly on the brink of a disaster, but you only need to be one step ahead of the opponent's attack. Maybe that's one of the great lessons here. As long as you're one step ahead of the opponent's attack and you win the game, no one's going to blame you for apparent king safety. King safety is relative. to the opponent's king, and white was getting through here, and if he knew by forcing moves he can get rid of that dangerous knight on c4 and the smoke clears, then that's it. What a fantastic tactical game. I'm very, very excited by this tactical game, and I hope you are too. A great one for Christmas Day, I think. So happy Christmas, happy New Year all, and I hope the greatest for your chess and enjoyment generally of life in the new year and beyond. Okay, comments or questions on YouTube? Thanks very much.